Hi, this is Patty Hodge at Dr. Nurses Rock, and this video is one of a series of 30 videos for the month of April on the topic of grief as a tribute to the anniversary of the 10th anniversary of the death of a loved one. And today's special guest is someone that I'm so honored to have here. Her name is Jill Purce. She is a British voice teacher, family and ancestral constellations therapist, and author. And I can tell you that her entire biography is on the web. And because it is so extensive, I'm just going to let you go there to her website and at jillpurce.com and read about this amazing woman who has been doing this work for decades now. So, Jill, I found you on Facebook in an advertisement about your workshops, and you were so gracious and said, "Okay, I'll come to your channel." So tell us about your work and how it relates to grief.
So one thing I just wanted to say, when people ask me about my website, I always say healingvoice.com because people never know how to spell my name, and you have to spell it with a J and a C, and so it's easier if anyway, so it's easier if you just say healingvoice.com.
Okay, so what I will do is any connection to you, I will put in the description below. So
Okay.
if there are specific links that you think will help people, I will definitely spell it all out and they'll find
Okay.
you.
Oh, thank you. So, well, I started with the voice years ago, and I realized that the voice was the most wonderful way of becoming present, which is very difficult to do because we're always worried about what we forgot to do yesterday, filled with regrets and dreads about what we do tomorrow. And fear is the main thing, fear of what might happen. And so I realized that the voice is the easiest way to meditate because mindfulness, which is a kind of sanitized form of meditation, is being mindful of whatever's happening, and that's not so easy. But the thing about the voice is you make a sound, and I teach overtone chanting, and you listen to the sound that you're making. So you're doing the thing that you're attending to. So you're creating a circuit of attention, and this is extraordinarily powerful and much easier than all the methods that are taught within every tradition. Every tradition has some way of being present, and it's not an easy thing to do. And using the voice is one of the easiest ways. And so I've been teaching the voice since then. Well, it's embarrassing. My husband always says I shouldn't mention it, but anyway, I've been teaching it since the 1970s. And I've done all kinds of crazy things, and so then more recently, and this is what really relates to your topic. Well, I say more recently, but I mean it's at least 25 or
Ah,
26 years that I've been doing this, so it's got not really very recent. 26 years I've been doing it at least. So using sound and ceremony as in a kind of family constellation process. So I this started for me not because the person who's made this very well known is somebody called Bert Hellinger, who's a German is now no longer with us, was a German therapist who I knew extremely well because he got me to talk to his students at a conference in Wiesloch in the 1990s, and he used my husband Rupert Sheldrake's theory to explain the knowing field and so on. But I started this much earlier because in the 1980s I was in Munich giving a workshop, and the organizer said, "Oh, that's so interesting what you're doing. Do you know Bert Hellinger? Because your work is so similar." So I hadn't heard of him then. So my work has a quite independent origin, really, although I became quite influenced by him later. So what the family constellation process is about is accessing the field, really, of family and ancestors. And it's about transgenerational traumas. So
yes.
interruptions and traumas that have happened in previous generations go on and on, affecting the living until somebody deals with it. So it's inherited without us knowing what's going on.
Yes.
And the kind of things that give rise to these, interruptions, as I call them, is early deaths, suicides, death of children, abortions, addictions, emigrations, dodgy dealing, injustices, what else? Incarcerations, in jail or in hospital early on, or things that have been forgotten and not discussed very often. So toxic secrets, secrets, family secrets that are not spoken about lead to a kind of toxicity which comes down through the family. And so it's really only the living that can resolve these issues. And so one of the things that happens is that people tend not to talk about them. So if people emigrate to a new land, for example, they don't discuss the land they've left, the people they've left. If somebody's died young or illegitimate birth, or, well, of course, nothing is inappropriate nowadays, but I mean, until recently, illegitimacy was considered inappropriate. So early death, for example, of a child. So it's easier not to talk about it and to think that it didn't exist. Whereas the work with the family constellations is very much about remembering what's been forgotten. So and rather, if there's an abuser, for example, rather than cutting the ties with that person and thinking, okay, now I'm fine, it's allowing that person to integrate into the field. And counterintuitively, it means actually honoring somebody who's done something horrible to you. And that is, firstly, really difficult, and secondly, extraordinarily powerful, because you're defusing them. Because actually, so often people do things, abuse people, because they want to belong. They want to draw attention to themselves. They want to figure large in people's consciousness. And so rather than cutting them off, which means they clamor even more and make a more of a nuisance themselves, you honor them so they can take their rightful place in the field and then are diffused and no longer wanting and needing to make trouble like clamorous children. And so very often it's about honoring the thing which is most difficult. And an abuser, somebody who's done something terrible, or even murdered somebody, so very often the work is about it seems to be about really dealing with the issue in a way that it doesn't keep recurring down the family. And so honoring the abuser, for example, or remembering that which is forgotten, talking about, so if a child dies young, for example, it would mean honoring that child. It would mean having somebody represent them. So it's very much working in space and time. So you're seeing the family through time, you're seeing the family through space, because when you're doing it physically, as opposed to online, which I also do, you choose, the person working chooses people to represent their family members, and then the guide, which is what I would describe myself as, if somebody has been forgotten but seems to be important, I would choose somebody from the group to represent them, bring them in, and then see what reaction there is to them, or have people honor them, or whatever it happens to be. Often, an elderly aunt might be put in a home, for example, and totally forgotten about. And so I might bring in somebody to represent the elderly aunt, and then have people honor them to activate the connection again. So it's very much about remembering what's been forgotten, and honoring the abuser, and diffusing the situation so it doesn't go on generation after generation.
Yes. I resonate with everything that you've said, and it's so powerful. And I do know that people and whole family constellations have this ability to heal, and that we can choose to be the person to do that for our family if we are aware of this and make the intention to do this. So at the root of this particular series is this idea of grief, and grief, in my terms, very simple terms, is every trauma has some loss attached to it, and every loss has some grief attached to it. And so when we've had a trauma in a family system, it's often something that has been repeated through generations. And we don't know that because there have been secrets, or there have been, lies even told about story, or the story is just lost because, as you say, people have migrated from one place to the next, or they've hidden it in a drawer somewhere. And so, the things that you have learned to do, I've read on your website all of these marvelous things and people and places and activities that you've been involved with. So there is it in getting into this field, into this energy field, is this a prayer? Is this something that the sound is part of? This how do we enter into this with you?
Well, I use sound and ceremony because that's where I began, and I think it's really important to uh, harness a means for very quickly going into the unconscious, drilling down, because I think a lot of these issues are very inaccessible. I mean, talking therapy, we can only talk about what we know.
Mhm.
And it's so important to have access to open up the channels for something else to come out. And so when I'm doing family constellations, between each person, I do a whole ceremonial process using the voice, both for everybody and for the person working, and I do it online as well. Um, so I think it's really important to. I wouldn't say it's a prayer exactly, because prayer involves, you know, who you're praying to.
Okay,
You have to really think about who you're invoking, I think, in prayer. Whereas I think meditation is less focused on an individual or an individual aspect of divinity. So, but I have to admit, I have spent, 40 years studying Tibetan Buddhism. And so I do tend to gravitate towards using sounds which I've received over the years. But I think it's really important to use sound and ceremony because they have a way of allowing us to access whole parts of us and open up whole parts of us that need to be opened for this work to happen, really, because it is about working with the family and ancestral field. And so I don't think it's enough to just talk, because talking exists on a rather superficial level, and most of these issues really go much deeper. Yeah.
much more primal into the person.
Yeah.
And often people, this is something that we've learned throughout these months here, the month here of grief is, often people feel choked when they're in grief. They can't speak and they can't express that. And so, getting that open for people, and someplace for that energy to expand is so
Absolutely.
important. Yeah. So, very, very briefly, I have some experience with what you're talking about, having been with very spiritual people throughout my life, people who were healers and wanting to bring about this health and family systems. And so I've been blessed with meeting many people. So you do this in online and in workshops. It involves all of the things that you've pulled into your life, your Buddhist learning and your voice learning, and living with a scientist who knows about fields. And um, Jill, I did mention that I knew about this book about healing the family tree, and that started interest years ago for me. And
Yeah.
one of the things that Kenneth McCall in this book talks about was using ritual or Eucharist, and that is a ritual that some people are familiar with. Uh, how did those kind of rituals work in your work?
So it's very interesting that because always I have done a workshop around the time of the Festival of the Dead in Christian terms, which
Okay.
is the end of October. Halloween is the evening of All Hallows, the evening of the Sanctified Dead, All Saints, and then All Souls, everybody else who's died. And so I have always, I can't imagine, at least 30 or 35 times during this period done a requiem mass in the church, local church. And well, maybe more than that, I think. And my husband, Rupert Sheldrake, plays the organ. And and I have gone through many vicars, priests over the years, and what we do is the participants of my week write the names of their ancestors down, and we give them to the priest who chants them. And while my husband plays the Russian Kontakion for the Dead, which is incredibly beautiful, on the organ, and we go and light candles for our ancestors. So I have found, I mean, I found it quite independently of this book, but I know I'm familiar with the book, but although I haven't read it, but I know the theme.
Yeah.
And I find that doing a requiem mass is extraordinarily powerful. And so so now since COVID, as you mentioned, I work online, and I found a way of doing exactly what I do in person online. Both the voice workshops and the family constellations, I alternate. I do one a month. And then twice a year I do an in-person week intensive, and I've got one coming up just now. And then I usually have one at the end of October, beginning of November, when I do this requiem mass. In fact, this year it's slightly later because the venue wasn't available, so it's actually going to be later, but I will be doing one over All Souls, and we will be having a requiem mass. So I think I have found, and I've actually done it in many different contexts. Actually, I found, for example, one of the things that I discussed recently, and we have a conference. I've used the family constellations not just for families but also for issues.
Yes.
So around regenerative farming, for example, I've done a number of family constellations, and a couple of years ago, I was on a panel called Trauma in the Land, and I discovered that one of the things that had happened is that the war dead, particularly in Europe during Napoleonic times, there were 60 battles or more, and so thousands and thousands of dead bodies lying around, and these bodies were all scooped up by poor people who didn't have any other means of earning a living, and but with a big boss at the top who profited hugely by it. They were imported into England in particular because of the Industrial Revolution, ground up and put all over the fields. And so I found, the reason I found out about this was because I had two people who did family constellations quite apart from each other. And they had both inherited land. There were two women, both inherited land, coming from farming dynasties. And their session was utterly chilling. I mean, unlike anything else I've ever known, except for slavery, where there's been slavery in the family. And so in both cases, I had them ask a priest to do a requiem mass over the land, and it helped enormously. And in fact, also there's a battlefield near where my husband, Rupert Sheldrake, was born, where there were 4,000 dead, which is quite small compared to some battles. And I had the priest there do a requiem mass for the souls of the dead. And because it often you find that battlefields become what we call accident black spots. Now, I don't know whether you can call them that anymore because it has all sorts of nasty connotations, but they're places where cars crash.
Gotcha.
so these are places very often around battlefields. So it's like the dead call the dead, call people to death. So and that's, we know that from family constellations. This is what happens. So if you've got a lot of death in the family, then a lot of suicides, for example, then people are pulled towards committing suicide unless you do something about it. So I had the vicar in this place do a requiem mass. So I found that the requiem mass is a wonderful way of dealing with honoring the ancestors. And this is something, the ancestors have no agency unless the living acknowledge them. And this is how I got into it in the first place, because I started to do, when I was working with the voice, and I started to do ceremonies for the ancestors, where we started going back and honoring the ancestors, the direct lines, so the mother's mother, mother, and the father's father's father. So the direct lines, because you can go anywhere. Obviously, we have thousands of ancestors. And what I found was miracles started happening. People who didn't know they had a half brother suddenly would come up, or all sorts of extraordinary things started happening. So that's how I actually got into the family constellations. I realized that you have to honor the ancestors, and the moment you honor them, it's magic. Finally they remembered me.
I can hear my ancestors saying that too at times because I do the digging. I'm the family historian, so I know the stories and I honor them and I wouldn't be here if they weren't existing at some point. So I'm eternally grateful to you that you have taken this time out to talk to me. I feel so honored and I'm so blessed to have this moment with you. I would love to come to where you are and be part of one of those masses at some point. That would be an amazing thing for
Well,
me.
I'm about to do one. I mean, very soon. The 20, what is it? It's this Friday. So it's no, Saturday. It's the 25th of April till the 1st of May.
Okay.
I won't be doing an ancestral a requiem mass at that point, but I am doing a week intensive, and I'm doing one in Canada, face to face as well, in British Columbia, on the island of Cortes in British Columbia, on the 24th of July till the 29th of July. And otherwise, I'm doing them, on every month. So the next one is, I look where it is. I don't. Oh, it's June. Oh yeah, there we go. Wait a minute. June the 19th, 2021, online is the next one online. Yeah, and it is amazing. And one thing actually I just wanted to mention that makes a big difference and a way of remembering the ancestors is by making a family altar. And this is something that I discovered when I traveled, in Japan. At that point, years ago in the early 80s, everybody had a family altar. And it was very patriarchal because, it was. And so it would be the last male ancestor. So in 2000, I made a family altar, but with my mother's side and my father's side. And I had John O'Donoghue, this wonderful Irish poet, honor it, who was staying with us at the time. So that's another way of really, regularly honoring the ancestors, because it's not something you do once and forget about. It's something you do regularly. So
It's a relationship. We're in a relationship with all that
absolutely,
came before. And so maintaining relationship is important. So I will make sure that people know how to find you.
yeah,
And I will, from this day forward, send blessings to you every time I think about you, which will be often because you've made a wonderful change on my channel, but just by being here. And I appreciate you.
yeah. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome.
We'll say bye for now.
Yeah, bye for now.